Shibboleth. Now this is time for audience participation. You all say it after me. Shibboleth. Shibboleth. Not bad. But if these were Old Testament times and you were all Ephraimites, you would have said Sibboleth. Now try that. Sibboleth. Ah, if you say it like that, the Gileadites are going to slaughter you. See, you just lost a major battle to the Gileadites, and you're trying to get out of Gilead and back to your homeland. But to do that, you have to get past the sentries that are waiting at the crossing of the River Jordan. And if those sentries find out you're Ephraimites, they will smite you. So how are they going to know? You guessed it, shibboleth. They're making everybody say a password. And by the way, if you were wondering, shibboleth either means a stream or an ear of corn. Anyway, they're making everybody say a password, and you are going to struggle with that password, you Ephraimites, because you do not have the sh sound in your language. Yeah. So it's likely that the very last word that you and some 42,000 other Ephraimites are ever going to say on this green earth is Sibboleth. Either that or, oh, sit. So that story from the book of Judges is likely the very first recorded use of linguistic profiling. That is, using elements of language as shibboleths to sort people. Now, the Gileadites may or may not have been the first people on earth to use shibboleths, but they certainly weren't the last. In fact, we still use shibboleths today. Humans are tribal by nature. And we have a variety of ways of doing this sorting of people into us and them. And language is just one of them. Some of the other ways we do it are by the way we dress, by where we live, by where we went to school, by which sports teams we root for, and of course, knowing that the mascot is not a golden retriever. Come on. It's a Chesapeake Bay retriever. So yes, there are many ways that humans have developed to sort people into groups, in-groups and out-groups. And that seems to be part of what makes us human. It has its problems. But language is one of the ways that we do this, and so that's where I'm going to focus. For example, people from here will tell me that they can tell something about people who call that city just to our northeast Baltimore versus Balmer versus Baltimore. Now, the first group, they tell me, is likely African American. Second group, likely Caucasian. And the third group, well, they're outsiders like me, people who aren't from around here. Now, where I'm from, in Western Pennsylvania, we use the second person plural pronoun as a way to sort people into locals and foreigners. You. Now, you is kind of a vexed pronoun. I don't know if you've realized it, but it can mean various things. So, whereas French has tu and vous, and Spanish has tú and vosotros, we've only got you. And does you mean you? Or does you mean you? It can get kind of confusing sometimes. So we've developed a variety of ways of getting around that, kind of regionally. In a big part of the country, they say you guys. Parts of the South say you all. Other parts of the South run it together to y'all. And then in New York, New Jersey area, some people say use. But where I'm from, it's yuns. Yeah. Yuns is a cross between a conflation of you and ones, right? We even sometimes say yuns guys. You ones and you guys. Don't ask me where it comes from, because like a lot of language, it's not really logical. It's not based in logic. It's just what we say. Now, I could probably tease some of you all for saying y'all, and you could tease me for saying yuns, and it's all just fun and games, right? No harm done, right? Not necessarily. So we all know that it is not good to discriminate on the basis of race, gender, skin color, religious affiliation, sexual orientation, and several other categories. It's taboo in our society. But language difference and language usage is one of those areas that's still fair game in terms of discrimination. And in fact, we often use language as a stand-in for some of these other categories. There's a sociolinguist named John Baugh who's conducted some fascinating, if rather disturbing, studies of linguistic profiling of African Americans and Hispanics. He's been able to show that discrimination on the basis of language can lead to profiling that excludes people in areas of lending, housing, employment, things like that. The way this usually works is that people in the power in those domains will make snap judgments based on what they hear in terms of accents. Now, what he's done in order to study this is that he calls those powerful people up and he takes notes. He collects data on how they react when he makes inquiries using different accents. So here he is talking to, I believe it's a rental agent in Detroit, Michigan.
Sure, may I help you?
Yes, my name is Michael Davis. I was calling to see if you might have any houses for rent that might be available.
So that's an African-American accent he was doing there, and here he is doing more or less the same call using a Hispanic accent.
Hello, this is Juan Ramirez. I'm calling about the apartment you have advertised in the paper. Yes.
So what he's found through his studies is that it's often the person who sounds white who gets the appointment. So yes, linguistic profiling and shibboleths are alive and well today in our society, and they can have real negative consequences for our communities. In case you were thinking that this is all, linguistic profiling is all about accents and pronunciation, it's not. We also profile people based on their age and their gender. You know, like, oh my God. When you make the ends of phrases and sentences sound like questions, even though they're not, uptalk. Sometime in the late 1980s, Valley Girl Speak started to crawl out of the San Fernando Valley and creep across the country. And pretty soon, young people everywhere were doing this upward inflection on the ends of their phrases and sentences. By the mid-1990s, it was pretty widespread. Even men and women, all ethnicities, lots of people were doing this upward intonation. Lots of you probably do it too. So, how many in the audience, raise your hand if you're a baby boomer? Good, good. So you are the folks, like me, who are probably most bothered by this uptalk. Is it true? Yeah. Yes. Baby boomers and the silent generation, we are still likely the only people in the country who haven't fully embraced uptalk. For most other generations, it's just normal, right? So baby boomers, talking about my generation. Yeah, we can get a little bit cranky about it sometimes, and we've even been known to profile sort of people by assuming that if they use this kind of language, this kind of uptalk, that they're unconfident, unprofessional, maybe hyper-feminine. But the truth is, there's nothing natural or preordained about a downward inflection at the ends of sentences and phrases. That's just a convention. And it happens to be a convention that, for now at least, marks youthfulness. But who knows, maybe in about 20 years, if you don't use uptalk, you may sound as stilted as FDR.
That the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
So in case you were thinking that shibboleths and linguistic profiling are all about accents, regions, things like that, no. We also profile people based on grammar. And grammar profiling is something that's highly affiliated and associated with the academy. It's true. Likely lots of you were told sometime growing up that it's wrong to use double negatives. Double negatives are things like, that won't do you no good, or he ain't got none. Somewhere, an English teacher or somebody probably told you, you can't use double negatives, it's illogical because two negatives cancel each other out, right? Well, if that's the case, then how is it that in a lot of other languages around the world, double negatives are common? That's just how you make a negative phrase, like in French, il n'en a pas. In Spanish, él no tiene nada. Both of those sentences have two negative particles, ne pas in French and no nada in Spanish. And they both, by the way, mean he doesn't have any, or he ain't got none. But it's perfectly acceptable, right? Now here's one that gets a lot of people who care about the rules fighting with each other. Is it between you and I, or between you and me? I'm not going to bore you with my explanation as grammar goddess of prepositions and object pronouns and why it should be what it is. I just want to say to those of you who are certain that you know what is the right thing, when was the last time you heard somebody get this wrong? They said either between you or I or between you or me. They got it wrong. And it meant something for the meaning, you couldn't understand them? Never, right? As the Ephraimites would say about that fact, who really gives a shit? So who then decides what's correct? And where do we get all these conventions? Where do they come from? Well, in most cases, it's the powerful people in society who decide what the conventions are for the rest of us. Truth. But sometimes, often actually, it's the people with the power in a particular situation who decides what's okay to say and what's not. For example, if I walk into a biker bar dressed like this, and I'm sitting with a guy who's all tats and chains, and he says, "Seen a really nice-looking Harley the other day." When I put on my grammar goddess role and I say, "I believe you mean you saw a really nice-looking Harley the other day." Now, how much longer do you think I'm going to be welcome at that bar? See, the point is, context matters. And what's considered correct depends on what bar you're sitting at. So then, does anything go? Can we say anything at all? Well, clearly no, because if we said absolutely nothing, we followed no conventions whatsoever, we wouldn't communicate at all, right? We wouldn't know what each other were saying. And actually, there are often times when it's important for safety and welfare and things like that to be clear and unambiguous in how you speak or write. Obviously, if you're writing technical or legal documentation, or if you're involved in high-level diplomacy, I mean, after all, you don't want to make a mistake like JFK did in Berlin and end up telling the whole world that you're a jelly donut. So then what do we do? How should we handle this? How do we handle this issue of correctness and appropriateness in our speech? I would say if you're in a formal speaking or writing situation, one where powerful people can make judgments about you, you might want to try to approximate the standard, approximate the kinds of language they're expecting of you, non-stigmatized language. But if you feel a little bit sassy and you're able to do this, you can code switch. Start out with what they're expecting, those powerful people, and then switch it up and use a vernacular that you're more comfortable with. That kind of calling the language game tells the person in power, in effect, I see what you're doing. I can do it, but I'm also going to tell you who I am. But when you're the one who has the relative power in the situation, it wouldn't do you any harm at all to pay attention first and foremost to meaning. What is the other person actually trying to say? Try not to judge people on surface aspects of their self-presentation or their language. Don't tune someone out because they have an accent. Don't judge someone as inferior because they use some kind of non-standard words like he ain't got none. And check yourself the next time you're feeling like you want to criticize someone's tweet just because they misspelled something or said the wrong there. In effect, don't be a language gatekeeper. It would behoove us all, I think, to try to eliminate shibboleths and linguistic profiling from the way we deal and speak with other people. And instead, let's try to use language in ways that are most welcoming, ways that bring in people to our schools and our communities and our offices. And I believe that, after all, is something that we can all give a sit about.